This actually brings us to our next session. And we now look at how do we double click on some of the new and emerging areas like STEM and energy efficiency, and how do we go deeper into that and how do we catalyze more capital towards that. And for this session, I'm going to now invite two speakers who have seen and experienced both the public and private capital space and are leading today organizations that promise to catalyze the pathway to impact. For this fireside conversation, joining us today here are Saurabh Kumar, Vice President India, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, and Ruchira Shukla, co-founder and managing partner, Synapses. From the role of partnerships to the evolving space of STEM technology, we look forward to learning a lot from this conversation. So a warm welcome to both of you. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Ranjana. Thanks to IIC for having us here for this very important conversation. And thank you, Saurabh, for joining me in this fireside. I'll start with making a few big picture comments on why this conversation is important, right? India is the world's third largest GHG emitter today. And India is on a fierce and aggressive growth trajectory, expecting to double its GDP in the next 6 years. And we have enough data to show that the world over, across small and large countries, no country has ever been able to increase its GDP per capita without increasing its energy consumption per capita. So undoubtedly, what we are expecting to see is large increases in energy consumption. Another data point which is astounding is if you look at the kind of renewable energy deployment and the capital that's gone to renewable energy over the last 2 decades, anybody would say that's huge and compelling. Despite that, in the last 2 decades, the percentage of fossil fuel in the global energy consumption has gone down a mere 2 percentage points, 78% to 76%. So we are still far, far away from having a majority renewable energy mix globally. And the numbers are better for India, by the way. India's renewable energy mix is 25%, so it's better than the global average, but still a long way to go. And combining that with our strong growth, rising aspiration, adding 100 million working age population over the next 10 years, India will keep adding consumer appliances, AC stock, vehicles, electric vehicles or ICE vehicles. Across the board, the need for energy will keep going up. So therein lies the first big issue. We want to be able to grow, we want to be able to decouple our growth with our energy consumption, and we want to have greener growth pathways. What that means is large-scale renewable energy deployment for various uses. And that brings me to the big area, Saurabh, you've been focusing on, right, which is battery energy storage systems. And again, it's an area where India is poised to be the third largest market for electrochemical energy storage system, particularly for wind and solar hybrid solutions. Maybe I'll hand that over to you with this data on what you guys have been doing, and I'll pick it up from there to talk about Synapses. Our fund focuses on STEM innovations for climate, and there are a lot of compelling new technologies in this space. But over to you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Ruchira. Let me also join thanking IIC for giving us this opportunity. Interesting conversation. I'll add a couple of more data points to what you just mentioned. The task ahead for India is something that the world has never seen. You're absolutely right saying that a GDP growth cannot be decoupled with energy. But what is the form of energy that the most developed world has used to become what they are, an economically developed nation? It is cheap fossil fuel energy, including China. What we will do till 2047, which is an aspirational target for us to become developed, is to possibly show to the world a new economic development model which is fueled by clean energy sources. Not an easy ask. And we at GEAPP are extremely excited to be a part of this journey because we see a lot of learnings that we can then take to the other global south, because they too have to develop and follow a model which you can't follow a China model or a US model or a UK model any longer in a climate constrained world. So, Ruchira, you very rightly said one of the focus areas has to be renewables. And if we look at, while India has done reasonably very well in renewable energy over the last decade, but if you see what lies ahead of us, 2030, we have announced a goal of 500 gigawatts. Today, as we speak, we have not even crossed 200 gigawatts. Our annual addition of renewable capacity was the highest last year at 18 gigawatts. If we continue this way, we are headed for a 200 gigawatt shortfall by 2030. Now remember, the government announced in 2017 or 18, 175 gigawatt of renewables by 2022. We did not do that. What is the consequence? I'm just putting data points out here. India has started to build 80 gigawatts of thermal capacity because the needs for energy is going to go up. Now remember, we have also said 2070 is when we will decarbonize. We can only decarbonize as a country if the power sector decarbonizes by 2050. Now if I build a coal plant in 2035, will the investors, and many of them may be sitting in this room, allow that plant to be closed 10 years, 15 years before their economic life is gone? So these are factors that need to be harnessed. So what we are doing in GEAPP is two things. Looking at how do we fill this gap of 200 gigawatts. And what we are focusing on is decentralized renewables. Just to give you two examples, one is agriculture. Agriculture has a consumption of 150 gigawatts. If it is solarized, that's something that will not only enhance the reliability of power supply to farmers, but also reduce subsidies for Government of India. Number two is solar rooftop, something that the government has announced early this year. And we feel this is a path-breaking just energy transition initiative, and we are supportive of that. And finally, to your question, if the country magically reaches 500 gigawatts, in order to integrate those renewables into the grid, you need 47 gigawatt of batteries, at least 4 to 6 hours of storage. We're already talking about 200 gigawatt hour of storage. What do you have today is absolutely none. So we have begun work on the first grid-scale battery energy storage plant in India here, which should be commissioned by mid-February of next year. It's a 40 megawatt hour pilot, and we're also supporting about 7 other utilities over a 2 gigawatt hour pilot, hoping that this would create a market. It'll create a playbook for battery storage projects to be done seamlessly without any problems, and we hope these actions catalyze at least directly relatable to us about 5 to 10 gigawatts in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's what our plan and interest in this space is.
And building on that sort of, right, like you talked about batteries, I think the world is underestimating how much battery power we will need and what the size of that market is, because we want to electrify everything, and we want to electrify with greener sources. Greener sources, renewables particularly, tend to be intermittent in their very nature, so we need batteries for that. We need batteries for the electricity sector, we need batteries for the mobility sector, we need batteries for the manufacturing and industrial sector. So the world needs lots and lots of batteries. The lithium-ion battery market alone, world over, is expected to be 400 billion by 2030. India is expected to play a very strong role. But therein lies the other rub, right? Because we are talking of huge needs for energy, huge needs for food, and you talked about the interlinkage, like the solarization of the agrarian economy. Food security and energy security drive geopolitics. We've seen that with the kind of stuff that happened over the last 2 years, with supply chain disruption, with the wars that happened. And I think every nation the world over wants to be independent on food and independent on energy, right? But lithium-ion supply chains are very strongly controlled by a handful of nations. And so we need to start becoming either independent and solve for that capacity, or we need to shift towards alternate battery chemistry, right? So batteries need to be energy dense, high performing, and also safe. We at Synapses, because we focus on STEM solutions for the space, are looking very actively at new battery designs, cell level innovation. Cells, by the way, make up 65% of the cost of a battery. And cell level innovation needs to come indigenously from India. The government's backing these programs. There is a $2.4 billion PLI scheme for advanced cell chemistries for India. So we're calling on entrepreneurs who can work their way through these tough problems and bring us those innovations. One of the companies we've already backed in our portfolio does a new kind of battery anode design with a plating that prevents battery fires. Right? We were talking earlier about batteries being needed for mobility. There have been horror stories of battery fires and kind of innovation that can win for India and globally. But I'll bring it back to you, Saurabh, and hand it back to you. When we talk about batteries, we also need interoperability, because we can't just keep mining for more and more of these rare earth metals. We should have interoperable batteries where we can have a second life for the battery. And that also leads me to this point of recycling battery, being able to recover and reuse the minerals. What work have you guys done, or any thoughts on that? And we can continue from there.
No, it's a very important thing that you have mentioned, and particularly I see the value chain of batteries starting from transportation to stationary storage and then back to recycling of these critical minerals. And I think a couple of things I would like to point out. Number one, in 2019, the government of India came out with a notification that you can register an electric vehicle without the battery, basically to spur a market on swapping, largely for 2- and 3-wheelers. But I see this market more from buses, and eventually if trucks also come in, and cars, because the batteries are larger. These transportation batteries, once they are no longer used for transportation, can actually be used for stationary storage. Now this does a whole lot of things if there are proper regulations which can drive innovation in this space. For instance, and I was very happy to see 2 days ago, one of the large electric OEMs come out with a 4-wheeler with battery as a service. Now, this is, to my mind, is something that will go a long way, A, in reducing the cost of acquisition of the electric vehicle, therefore pushing that envelope there. Number 2, the cost of storage is also going to go down. Today, the cost of storage is very, very high, and you mentioned about the geopolitics of lithium, nickel, and cobalt. I think there's another kind of geopolitical play that we are seeing in the batteries market is China having an oversupply of batteries. And if you see last 6 months, the battery prices globally have crashed 60%. Now, this is exactly what China did in the solar space. I'm not saying making a value judgment, good, bad, or ugly, but I think we should be mindful of these things, and therefore your point of how do we become more and more self-sufficient in whatever we have by having these innovative regulations where you start to have 2 owners of a vehicle, one owned by me as the vehicle itself, and one you as the battery. And after 8 years, you redeploy the battery maybe for stationary storage. So I think, and this is something we started off in GEAPP a year ago, where we asked for an innovation. We ran an innovation challenge, and this was one of the things that we have got. We've got a couple of solutions. We are trying to see how we can push them into commercialization. So I think this is a very, very important area of work moving in the future.
Absolutely, and so we won't have enough, at least in the near future, domestically, right? Like we need to have larger scale programs beyond the PLI as well. We need to have innovations. We need venture capital money to go towards that. But while solving for newer, greener forms of energy and battery storage systems, we also want to solve for energy efficiency. energy efficiency in the home environment, energy efficiency in the industrial environment. We've seen a lot of equipment, home appliance companies come out with appliances that are more efficient, that use better motors, highly efficient ones. And Attenberg was one that I looked at extensively during my days at IFC. But also on the manufacturing and industrial side. There will be both a demand for moving processes where energy is being used from fossil fuels to renewables, but also to have energy efficient processes. And the innovations that we are backing there are, I'll name two that we've been spending a lot of time with. One does waste heat recovery solutions. So they take heat from one place in the manufacturing setup and uses it for heating requirements in another place in the same manufacturing plant through the use of heat exchangers and heat pumps that are not new. If you think of it, I'm a chemical engineer from many decades ago, and we've always talked about heat exchangers and heat pumps, but how do you make them smart? How do you have the right control system and the right data on energy efficiency? And so this company we are backing is doing a lot of good work in repurposing the heat, therefore reducing the overall energy consumption in the plant, and hence reducing GHG emission. Another one that we've been actively tackling is enabling the use of flexi fuels in manufacturing setups, right? We're all talking about hydrogen should go into manufacturing to reduce the need for fossil fuels. But in order for hydrogen to be used in a manufacturing setup, the burner of the furnaces needs to be upgraded. And the company we are talking about has created a 3D printed burner that allows flexi fuels. So there is a heartening amount of innovation coming from across India that will allow industrial setups and home setups to be energy efficient. In some ways, I would even call upon corporates, manufacturing houses to start piloting these technologies, to have some kind of a sandbox for new innovation. And I think that will also require entities like yourselves to provide some TA support for piloting some of these technologies.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right, and fascinated to hear about the portfolio companies. And I'm sure India is now become emerging as a hub for technical innovation. And the innovation challenge that I talked about, and we are going to restart this challenge next year. And we intend to have a technical assistance support for these to commercialize some of these technologies. But you hit a very important element, which is largely not talked about in the rooms. You find this mentioned in communiques and others, joint statements, is the role of energy efficiency. And I'll just point out one simple fact, data point. That was an analysis by the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, almost about 6-7 years ago. And they said, India is a hot country. The cooling needs of this country will only increase. Today, the air conditioner penetration in homes is less than 10%. If it goes to 30% by 2030, and also we follow the kind of the efficiency curve that we are seeing in the regulatory space, India will need 150 gigawatt of incremental demand by 2030 only for cooling. But if you can nudge the curve towards the super efficient air conditioners, you can reduce this by 60 gigawatts. So I think, yes, we see a lot of technical innovation by innovators. I think we need to see a lot more policy and regulatory innovation from the governments at large. And otherwise, we will be headed to a situation where while we try to decarbonize, but it just becomes just too hard for the system itself to manage. And I gave you one example of air conditioner. There are plenty that you can do. Remember, the India that will stand in 2047, 70% is yet to be built. And that is where we have a golden chance, both as the private sector, governments, and industry, to shape that sustainable future.
Absolutely. In fact, some of the numbers on growth continue to astound me, right? We all keep saying India is growing. I recently was reading this article that talked about how sales for Hyundai's sales for SUVs, the highest sales has come from rural India, right? And that's compelling, right? So there are aspirations, there is money, there's disposable income in beyond metros across India, and all of that will be spent to improve lifestyles will be spent on AC stock, it will be spent on, all the appliances and lifestyle goods that people use, and most of them are energy guzzling, right? So this is something that we need to continue trying to prepare ourselves to brace while having that double target of going to net zero. So I think it's the combination that makes it difficult. And a lot of capital is flowing in, but I want to shift direction to go into this, this case I want to make for more catalytic capital, more blended capital, right? Because there's VC dollars, but funds like ours we are custodians of LP capital. We have to return market and outsized market returns, right? There would be pools like yourselves that can bring in some concessional, some support, and then of course be calling on government to make enabling policies, but also put out capital. So I'd love to get some examples from you, Saurabh, on the TA pools that have been available and how you can blend in some capital to make this possible.
So I'll mention first about the blended finance structure, and it's really timely that you raised this point in our discussion. Just 2 days ago, you might have heard or read in the papers yesterday that the electric bus payment security mechanism has been cleared by the government of India. That's a payment security mechanism of about. They've identified the subsidiary of EESL, which is CESL, to host that payment security mechanism. This whole thinking started about 1.5 years ago, largely driven by GEAPP, where we committed to the government that we, along with the US government, will put together a payment security mechanism for 10,000 buses. This also found mention in Biden-Modi joint statement. And we have been working with the government over the last 1.5 years, where GEAPP and US government are contributing 150 million to this payment security mechanism. And as I mentioned to you, 350 million is something that the government of India has put in. Now what it does is that this will leverage nearly, this will move 50,000 buses into electric. And that's about $9 billion of investment. Imagine a small pool. And most importantly, what the government has done, and I was listening to the previous conversation in the previous panel, is that it has empowered CESL to become the SECI for transport. Now, SECI is the Solar Energy Corporation of India, which means if a state transport utility defaults on the payments to let's say, Tata Motors or JBM, CESL has the power to dip into the RBI account of that state, take that defaulted money out and pay to the OEM, which means this is going to be a payment security mechanism in perpetuity, and more investments flow, private investment flow will come into the electrification of the public buses. So this is a system change that we have been able to nudge the government of India, and we are very proud to be associated with an ecosystem change like this. The second thing that we have used a small amount of technical assistance in blueprinting Maharashtra's energy transition plan. A very proactive planning where we have, basically what we did was made sure that their assessment of till 2030, that they will put in 10 gigawatts of thermal, we were successfully able to nudge them to reduce it to about 3.5 gigawatt, increase their ambition on renewables and storage. We've done this TA, it's not just a blueprint, we have also put a PMU around, we have identified 130 projects, and slowly we are helping them to build out and bid out projects. So in future also we would use a combination of blended finance using the concessional capital, but we feel TA is perhaps the most important thing when it comes to public sector, because the capacity, institutional capacity to throw up new ideas and new projects is really, really low. And of course, we would like the TA to be used when we look at new innovators and new technologies that need commercialization, which are for decarbonization. So that's what we are doing, and happy to talk to you more offline on this.
No, absolutely. This will create a big mark. It will definitely move the needle. I also want to bring in another element, Saurabh. No conversation from India on energy can be complete without bringing in technology and AI and the world's resounding conversation and dialogue on how AI will need an immense amount of energy. And a little plug for the work that my team at Synapses is doing with Microsoft. We are running an innovation challenge on decarbonizing the tech sector, because everybody likes to use ChatGPT for everything they do. I think no analyst the world over passes a day without using ChatGPT, right? But all of that needs energy. All of that means data centers are becoming energy hungry, and we would like to find solutions to make the tech sector more energy efficient across hyperscalers, but also the tech services. So we're doing some work on that. Watch the space. Over the next few months, we should be able to identify some winning innovations in the tech sector decarbonization space. Coming back to where we are today, I think overall the key messages are strong growth in energy needs. We want alternate energy solutions. We want battery storage systems. We would like to solve for energy efficiency across the world. And India can be a leader in that. I agree with the point you were making earlier that India can actually innovate for the world. So I'm very positive on the journey we are on. I think it's an audacious task ahead of us, but also a massive opportunity. No conversation on climate is complete without India being a key part of the solution. So on an optimistic note, I think we are excited about backing innovators to solve for the energy transition. And any last words, Saurabh, from you?
No, I completely agree. And I think one of the big things that we are also very excited about is the digital journey that we feel that energy transitions cannot happen without a major role played by digitization, use of tech, big data, and of course AI with a decarbonized leg. So let me thank you once again for a wonderful conversation, Ruchira.
Thank you. Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, guys.